Welcome to News from Neptune for December 20th in the penultimate week of 2019. I'm Carl Estabrook. The socialist Rosa Luxemburg, murdered by a self-proclaimed socialist government in the aftermath of World War I, said the most revolutionary thing one can do is always to proclaim loudly what is happening. Remarkably enough, we seem to be verging on a discussion in this country of what the term socialist actually means. It's not easy owing to generations of U.S. propaganda. Noam Chomsky, who inspires our program, says terms like capitalism and socialism have been so evacuated of meaning that I don't like to use them. There's nothing remotely like capitalism, in Karl Marx's sense, in existence. To the extent there ever was, it disappeared in the 1920s. Every industrial society today is one form or another of state capitalism. Close quote. That doesn't deny that state capitalist regimes who called themselves socialist made immense strides in the 20th century, notably in Russia and China. Since 1990, News from Neptune has been a weekly hour of spontaneous and unrehearsed discussion of the news of the week and its coverage by the media, first on a so-called community radio station, and now via Urbana Public TV and YouTube. Earlier editions of this program are available at archive.org. Chomsky says in the U.S. media, either you repeat the same conventional doctrines everybody is saying, or else you say something true, and it will sound like it's from Neptune. David Green and I, with the help of J.B. Nicholson, will try to say some true things on a present edition of News from Neptune. Present was Tulsi Gabbard's appropriate answer when asked to vote on the House Democrats' two resolutions on impeachment. Shock and horror from both sides that Tulsi said present. It's a riot. The best comment on her answer was Jeffrey Sinclair's, who said Tulsi Gabbard, as if answering the ultimate phenomenological question, courageously voted present twice. I think that's exactly right. And as the only serious candidate, I think, for President of the United States at the moment, Tulsi Gabbard did exactly right. As someone said, as Jeffrey said, in the same, I'm quoting here his comments in Counterpunch this morning, he said, there's nothing quite like a debate where moderates are tearing into other moderates over who is the more moderate. That's his characterization of last night's Democratic debate. And we have to remember that since Tulsi Gabbard did not participate in last night's Democratic debate, they're all pro-war anyhow, so their moderation does not extend to that.
Well, you could cut Sanders a little bit of slack in that regard.
Not much. He keeps, didn't you think he weaseled a bit on Palestine last night?
Yeah. Oh, I didn't see that. I didn't watch it, and I didn't read the transcript if there is one. But if he weaseled a bit, then shame on him. But he's, in terms of being at least marginally anti-war, he's clearly apart from the other candidates, as far as I know. Other than Tulsi Gabbard,
I think that's fair. Marginally, but I think we should underline marginally. We should refer probably to the book by Jeffrey Sinclair that, since we're mentioning we're taking his name in vain in any case right now, Jeffrey's book on the last election and Sanders, called Bernie and the Sandinistas, is still the definitive account of his betrayal of the left, however much it was encouraged by the Democratic National Committee in the last presidential election.
Well, when the entire Democratic Party establishment is bent on making sure that Sanders doesn't get the nomination, you know he must be doing something right.
I think that's true.
When the press, there was an article by Katie Halper on I guess the Common Dream, on the Jacobin website, on one of the moderators of last night's debate, a woman that I don't know because I don't watch public television anymore. Alcindor?
Yes.
How do you pronounce her first name? Yamiche?
That's close. That's as close as I can come.
I mean, she has a whole record of dissing Sanders. she, among other people, she may not have been any more anti-Sanders than anyone on that panel last night. In Frank Bruni's commentary this morning, he only mentioned every other candidate, every other of the 6 candidates in substantive terms, at least superficially substantive terms. He didn't mention. He only mentioned Sanders twice, and only in kind of passing terms. He didn't refer to anything that Sanders actually said last night. So you know who Frank Bruni is for, not that you expect anything else.
Sanders is being, with reference to the recent British election, Sanders is being Corbynized, right?
Yeah.
I think that's true.
At least he hasn't been called an anti-Semite yet by people who matter.
They've come close. That's
they've
right.
Come by people who matter, and of course the only thing that's keeping them from doing that is he's Jewish.
Yeah, but
that's not going to stop
exactly.
If push comes to shove, that's not going to stop him.
Right. I have from an impeachable source. I have an account of impeachment, that question and answer form that should be attended to. Question: what is impeachment? Answer: it's the official constitutional method for screaming at the sky because Trump is president. Question: why is Trump being impeached? Answer: Trump has committed some very serious offenses, from not being a Democrat to being a Republican. He also won the 2016 election, which rises to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors. He also restored the celebration of Christmas after 8 years of winter, with no Christmas under Obama. This drove Dems up the wall, so they drummed up some charges against him. Question: why didn't Democrats include any criminal offenses in the articles of impeachment? Answer: there were just so many of them, it was hard to pick one. So instead of laying out actually impeachable offenses, the Democrats summarized it all with 2 main articles of impeachment. 1, Trump is president. 2, Trump is president. Question: what does it take to remove the president from office? Answer: faith, trust, and pixie dust. Question: will Trump be removed from office? Answer: LOL. If we believe in ourselves and try hard and Trump is removed, Hillary Clinton becomes president, right? Answer: actually, Mike Pence would become president, basically making the United States into a Handmaid's Tale style dystopia. What happens if Trump is impeached in the House but acquitted in the Senate? Answer: Democrats don't get the big prize, but they each get a complimentary copy of Impeachment the Board Game. Question: once the House votes to officially impeach President Trump, what happens next? Answer: Trump wins the 2020 election. Close quote. That seemed the best account of what we saw this week that I'd seen.
I'll take it. Just to finish up maybe on some of this, I actually had Tulsa Gabbard voting present as sort of number 1 on my numbered list, even though I have a couple of other things.
Two minds with but a single thought of where to start today, huh?
And I noticed on Amy Goodman's website, on the Democracy Now! Website this morning, there was an entire segment on the fact that they winnowed out all the people of color other than Andrew Yang, who is referred to as a person of color in our current political context. They winnowed out all of them, and they were talking people like Amy Goodman. You know, this is Amy Goodman. This is the flagship, supposedly, let's say, liberal left media outlet. They're just with people bemoaning the idea that Cory Booker wasn't there, and that Julian Castro wasn't there. Not necessarily. Now, Tulsi Gabbard is also being referred to as a person of color in this context.
She's Samoan, right?
And fine. I think it's kind of silly, but still, it's fine. But it doesn't that doesn't get to the point. It doesn't matter who the POCs are. And they also even said, one woman on Amy Goodman said something, well, you do need someone who looks like Kamala Harris to be there. You need a black woman to be there. I can't believe that people have gotten so ridiculously silly about this diversity politics, identity politics issue. It's so shallow and it's so stupid. And Amy Goodman should be promoting in her own, since she does have a news program that has a political slant, she should be using that to support Bernie Sanders. And I fear that she's not even trying to do that.
I think you're absolutely right. The plague of IDPOL, identity politics, IP, whatever you like it, extends a long, long way and is undergirds an awful lot of the destruction of serious political discussion here and elsewhere. There are people suggesting that one of the reasons, not the only one of the reasons Labour did so badly in the British election is that the British left, the left concentrated in the Labour Party, has been won over to identity politics, and they're far more concerned about diversity than about exploitation. They're far more concerned about discrimination than and discrimination of all sorts of groups that have now said, look, we're discriminated against too. They're much more concerned about that than they are about exploitation. Of course, the British Labour Party began as an objection to the exploitation of the British ruling class, and ostensibly has always stood for that as the principle of their being. What the years of New Labour did was undercut that substantially, very desperately, and the emergence of Corbyn was supposed to be a restoration of the Labour Party's concern with exploitation. But even Corbyn was forced to say in the last week before the election what his pronouns were, i.e., that he was to be addressed as he or
That's
now,
also on my list. Yeah.
When that's the issue, they've already won, and the notion of a left party, a party concerned about exploitation, as the Labour Party was supposed to be, has once again lost, as it has time and again since its founding. It's an incredible victory for identity politics, which has always been a way to destroy the true left, the left based on opposition to exploitation.
Thomas Edsel, who lives at the intersection of bad liberal New York Times journalism and bad liberal political science,
nasty neighborhood,
had a column earlier this week in which the theme basically was how far should the Democratic Party go in supporting transgender rights.
Good heavens!
And it was taken seriously by, I think, at least a dozen political scientists, presumably reputable ones, although I haven't heard of, I don't think, any of them, but who am I to have heard of any political scientists, other than the 2 or 3 we usually mention on this program, who've done some decent work. But the assumption of this discourse is that to support transgender rights in the manner in which it's being promoted, including in relation to Corbyn, is to be on the far left, or even maybe the hard left. That's as left as it goes. And the question becomes, the confusing, absurd, pointless question that comes out of that is how centrist should Democrats be in qualifying their support for transgender rights, when in fact it's absolutely neoliberal and centrist these days to support transgender rights, and that's part of the problem. And I was having a little discourse with my friend Nina Paley this morning about some of these things, and there's been more on Louis Proyek's Mark's Mail list about that, and there's been an article in the New York Times, which maybe you noticed this morning, Carl, that Harry Potter is now a TERF. Harry Potter is a trans exclusionary radical feminist.
Well, or his author is.
So let me put a plug in, and I told Nina, I said I wish I knew enough about Harry Potter books to make a clever comment about this. And
I don't know if I can make a clever comment, but I know enough about the books. I've read them to 2 kids.
Yeah, right. Nina's being on the case, as she always is. She actually has her own little chat room called the Neenster, Neen, which I guess you can subscribe to and find out what's going on, because she kind of avoids the the rough and tumble of the broader web, where she gets beaten up on a lot for being a quote unquote TERF.
TERF, right?
So she apparently does have she or some other people that contributed to her Neenster blog or her Neenster chat room. Apparently have some clever things to say about that. Maybe you do too, Carl. I don't know.
I don't know what's clever or not, but I do have something to say about what's happened here. And I must admit, I have read the entire Harry Potter oeuvre from beginning to end out loud to two kids now.
You are a better man than I am.
Well, kids turned up and said, "Hey, read me this stuff," and
Thank God I did not have that problem.
I enjoyed it immensely.
All right.
As you can tell from this show, I like reading things to people, but I also like reading that because, in fact, I think it's quite good. It was the series was savaged by literary critics with their upturned noses. That's not a tribe within Harry Potter, although it might be. The stories are good. I mean, she's J.K. Rowling is writes well, but she has caused a great deal of trouble in Britain in the run-up to the election by saying women should be free to recognize and say that men are males, even when the men declare themselves to be transgender women. A tweet by the influential author of the Harry Potter stories affirming her position was posted after a UK British employment judge allowed an employer to fire a woman for saying a man's claim to have an opposite-sex gender does not actually change his biological sex. Now let's see what's happening here fundamentally in terms of Rowling's case. What happened was that a woman was fired for a job for saying that sex was biologically determined, and that was not a matter of choosing this or that. Now, you can argue that point, and it's perfectly appropriate to argue it, but it seems to me to fire someone from a job because they believe that is the worst sort of, as an example of the worst sort of violations of free speech that we might find these days. Rowling condemned the firing of this woman who expressed this opinion. The UK judge declared the fired woman, Maya Forstater, name almost sounds like Harry Potter locution, is, quote, is absolutist in her view of sex, and it is a core component of her belief that she will refer to a person by the sex she considered appropriate, even if it violates their dignity and or creates an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment, close quote. That's the judge in the case of this woman's firing. He continues, the approach is not worthy of respect in a democratic society, the judge declared. Well, now, I don't see where you can have a clearer case of a violation of free speech rights than you can in this, and that's basically what Rowling said. The judge's moral claim prompted much pushback among women who say women's rights depend on a clear recognition that women's sex and biology are different from men's sex and biology, even though both sexes are different, complementary, and equal. On and on and on. The Rowling tweeted her support for Forstaters, the woman in question, free speech, and said, and I think rightly so, quote, dress however you please, call yourself whatever you like, sleep with any consenting adult who will have you, live your best life in peace and security, but force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real? That seems to J.K. Rowling a clear absurdity, and I think she's right.
At the risk of piling on, I came across, when I was doing a little Googling about this in the last few days, I came across an article that was apparently in a conservative, or what you consider conservative or right-wing newspaper or website of some kind, reporting in the news, I'm not sure whether it was recently or within the last year or two, that in a state level track meet in the state of Connecticut, that the top, in the 55-yard dash or something, the top 3 finishers were all transgender women. In other words,
or
boys
transgender males
allowed to race against girls.
Right.
And the upshot of the story, and the right sort of the hook of this story, was that a woman, a girl who, a teenage girl, woman who had finished 4th, was being denied a college scholarship on the basis of not having finished in the top 3 or some such thing. And this is just the kind of thing that whenever you go in this direction, and I started talking about this over 3 years ago in relation to the discourse around sexual assaults on campus and so forth, whenever the quote-unquote left, liberal left, gets completely confused and completely dogmatic about these issues, the only people that are saying true things are the unabashed conservatives. At that point, it was stuff that was on Reason magazine, or Read, the journal called Reason, the conservative journal called Reason. Here it's in some other, and whether it's on Tucker Carlson, which Nina Paley went on, and I'm sure is criticized for, or going on to interview with Jordan Peterson, someone I don't like, but who has people on to talk about these issues. And then to call for Thomas Edsall at the same time to confusing it even more by calling pro-transgenderism far left, thus completely showing a lack of understanding of what the far left means in material and class terms. It's just too much. Throw up your hands. I don't like to throw up my hands when I'm on TV, but
he says, throwing up his hands.
If this is in fact TV, but anyway. One of the results of recent political developments in this country is, it seems to me, completely to destroy the usefulness of the terms left and right. Or if you're going to use them, be very careful about what you say is left or right, because the contradictions are bizarre. And the principal villain in the piece is identity politics. Remember that identity politics emerged in the early years of this century because the neoliberal response to the criticism of American politics meant that one had to find some other way to say that there's something wrong with it. And it's unfortunate that we've not got that language straightened out yet. Here, for example, is what a supposed conservative, who himself refers to the left in disparaging terms, said about the impeachment business this week. Seems to me that's perfectly right, and at least not that long ago would have been called a left analysis of the situation, but instead it's cast in terms of attacking the left. This is Tucker Carlson, whom David just mentioned. He said on his program yesterday, President Trump became the 3rd president in history to be impeached by the House of Representatives. Over on the other channels, Jeff Zucker and his friends are hyperventilating. They want you to believe that this is the Hindenburg of political stories. It's the most significant event in American governance since the Continental Congress. The president apparently doesn't agree. He seems nonplussed, even cheerful. He's in Battle Creek, Michigan tonight holding a rally.
Here in Washington, meanwhile, things have taken a distinctly hallucinogenic feel, like the entire staff of the Department of Reality took an all-inclusive cruise to Barbados and didn't come back. Everywhere you look, adults are behaving like children, drunk ones. Hilarious absurdities now seem normal. Transparent lies pass as truth. Hunter Biden is regarded as a world-class expert on natural gas and corporate governance. On television, people with advanced degrees assure you that giving weapons to Ukraine guarantees American national security. On CNN, they're telling you that Democrats are despondent over impeaching the man they hate most in the world. They're all wearing black today because they really mean it. It wasn't choreographed. These are people who haven't set foot in a church without a camera in 20 years, yet they're sincerely, and we're not joking about this, deeply prayerful about the whole impeachment process. They're incredibly solemn. Now, close quote. That's Tucker Carlson, a well-known conservative, condemning the left. But its eminent sense and the notion of calling either of these positions conservative or left is useless unless you indicate what you mean by that. Tucker Carlson's summary of yesterday's impeachment celebration seems to me just about right. And I'm on the left.
Yeah, right. Well, the podcasters that I've been mentioning recently on the program that do the podcast called What's Left are very generous in their understanding of these issues, which is why I like them. Benjamin Studebaker and Amy Therese.
Yes.
And what they've said about Tucker Carlson is that he's basically what would have been called a social conservative at one point in time, meaning that. And that probably, being a social conservative in his case, probably doesn't even mean being opposed to, say, gay marriage in this particular context.
Oh, I think that's right.
But beyond the social conservatism of manners and morals and support, maybe even supporting markets or supporting what conservatives would call free markets, but what we don't really have in neoliberal corporate contexts. What that also means in his case is being skeptical of foreign policy, including wars. That's conservative, and that has a certain lineage in terms of isolationism, and so you condemn people like that for being isolationist in the pre-World War II context, and then all the assumptions and labels that go along with that, and with being associated with people who are also isolationists, of course, like the anti-Semite Henry Ford. So that gets ridiculously confusing. And then, of course, Carlson has done some work. I think there was actually a segment of his that was posted on the Naked Capitalism website, because he talked about the I forget what town it was, or what community community it was that he was talking about in terms of the manner in which its economy has been decimated by public policies that have basically abandoned, or public and corporate policies that have basically abandoned Rust Belt or heartland places like this. So let's define what we mean by left, and then let's talk about how the left intersects with Tucker Carlson. But transgenderism basically has nothing to do with any of that.
That's right.
And except for for supposed TERFs, who basically are, like this woman Jyoti Brar, who speaks from a sort of a Marxist-Leninist point of view, basically saying, if we're materialists, we understand human sexuality to be a kind of material fact, and we go from there.
That's an excellent point. It seems to me that there's a sort of postmodern delusion abroad among the people who consider themselves left. One of the reasons I always thought postmodernism was nonsense. The delusion is that it's not whether you're this or that; it's what you think you are that matters, and that's. In questions like this, that's simply not true. To be working class is an objective fact, not a subjective one, and to be biologically male is an objective fact, not a subjective one. And this is what's being challenged in the name of the pseudo-left that we're talking about right now. A couple of the sites, the websites that have discussed these matters well for a while have a similar name, and one is in trouble right now. I'm thinking of Truth Out.
Truth Dig.
And Truth Dig. I'm thinking of Truth Out and Truth Dig.
Oh, both of them. Okay.
They
only read about Truth Dig, yeah.
The similarity is only in name.
Yeah, right.
Truth Out has been around for a long time and is what I would have called a few years ago a sort of standard, boringly liberal site.
Yes, right.
It was the late Alex Coburn who said Truth Out should be called Truth Left Out, and I think that's probably right. But I want to talk about Truth Dig. That's the one this is the one David and I have been referring to a moment ago. From Jeffrey Sinclair, Truth Dig, one of the few progressive sites willing to call out the Russiagate hysteria, challenge the Democratic Party hierarchy and donor class, and lift up the voices of the Palestinians in the face of Israeli war crimes, is imploding. The publisher, Zweede Kaufman, who has lent this site an estimated $2 or $3 million, has had bitter clashes with the legendary editor-in-chief and co-owner of the site, Robert Scheer, over the past few months. Scheer's even older than we are, even older than I am, sorry.
Sad to say.
But,
no, I'm sorry. When I turn 70 next year, then you can start calling us we.
That's good. The disputes at Truth Dig, staff members say, revolve around Kaufman's, the founder, or rather the funder, Kaufman's desire to make the site more mainstream and commercially viable by catering to the Democratic Party establishment and adopting the dominant narratives about supposed Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election, as well as other stances embraced by mainstream outlets such as MSNBC. Now, if you're as shocked as I am at the way in which the supposedly leftist sites, most notably Democracy Now!, have imploded recently, you can't be pleased by news like this. The dispute between Scheer and Kaufman came to a head last week when Kaufman attempted to fire Scheer. Scheer and Kaufman lawyers are now in mediation. What seems certain is that the working relationship between Scheer and Kaufman is over. The site will descend, without Scheer's integrity, vision, and courage, into another mediocre and banal handmaiden of corporate Democrats. Several senior staff members and contributors, including Chris Hedges, the site's most widely read columnist, Dwayne Booth, the cartoonist known as Mr. Fish, and the executive editor Cassia Anderson, among others, are expected to leave the site if Scheer is forced out. Well, this is true, and unfortunately, it's not all that unusual. I mean, this is what's been happening to left sites, really left sites, sites that really are opposed to capitalism in the last decade. And to see Truth Dig go that way is very sad.
Yeah. I mean, one other example of a website in these same circumstances would be Common Dreams, which popped up probably around 2001, 2002, and has managed to survive ever since, although I'm sure it's challenged for funding. But post-Trump, they just went all in for the sort of the liberal anti-Trump line. They continue to do good, you know, what we consider liberal left reporting on labor movements and economic inequality. But one thing one notices after a while on this website and perhaps others is that reporting the data on economic inequality isn't necessarily helping people to understand what the sources of that really are. I mean, the idea that there should be less economic inequality is a good idea, just as it's a good idea that there should be less racial discrimination. In fact, it's a better idea than the fact that there should be less racial discrimination. But still, what I've come to realize is a lot of the good data that's been disseminated over the last, in the post-Piketty era, is not really necessarily helping people to understand how this social class system, how this exploitative system actually works, and what needs to be done to overturn it. So I think that remains to be seen. But basically the message, the sort of economic exploitative message, has just been completely crowded out by the anti-Trump aspect, the sort of liberal feminist aspect of it, the POC, people of color aspect of it. Not to deride any of that, but feminism as it's being understood in these liberal contexts is just women instead of just men exploiting women, you have women and men exploiting women and men.
The concentration of wealth in America continued. It's been going on for a long time. Been going on since the Depression. The concentration of wealth in America continued at an accelerating rate in the Obama years, while wages remained flat. Most Americans know that was true in their own lives, but to see it true across the economy as a whole, the society as a whole, takes some work by specialists. It's not that obvious to the, quote, person in the street, close quote. Obama-Clinton war provocations of Russia and China increased in the Obama years as well. So concentration of wealth and war provocations were characteristics of the pre-Trump administration. The name for those positions are neoliberalism and neoconservatism. And Trump became president, at least in part, because he was the first major party candidate in 40 years to attack neoliberalism and neoconservatism. The scandal is that in office he has been tamed one way or another to support those policies in his own administration. But the great fear amongst our political class, the political establishment, is that he might revert. Trump is unreliable. He might actually go back to those things he said during the campaign. He may actually talk about removing troops from Syria and Afghanistan. He might actually do it. He might actually talk about economic advantages for the average American. He might actually do it. I'm not suggesting that he will. What I am suggesting is that the political establishment is desperately afraid he will and have to get him out of office one way or another before he makes such a fatal mistake. The guy is not reliable. The problem is that the policies that are being proposed in opposition to Trump are those same neo-lib and neoconservative policies, and they are not popular. People are not fools. People understand what the American government has been doing and whom it's working for, and have for a long time. That's what made Trump president. That's why 6 states that voted for Obama flipped to Trump in the last election, and that's why he's president, strange as he may be. So support for the impeachment nonsense is support for the CIA deep state permanent government agenda, those policies of more war and more austerity. And that's what generates Trump's base. Now, the whole point of the Democrat attack on that has been to say, oh, it's racism. They're deplorables. Remember Hillary Clinton on that. That's where Trump's base comes from. In fact, and here's the real kicker for the Democrats, Sanders, of course, speaks to the same quite real anxieties about neoliberalism and neoconservatism, which is why the permanent government can't allow him to be nominated. He might win. But until we recognize that Sanders and Trump, in their peculiar ways, are both speaking for the real anxieties of the American population, the mood that might be called populism, if you define your terms right, we won't understand why the poor Democrats are left with fantastic enterprises like Russiagate, and all they have in the upcoming election is the mantra "Orange Man Bad."
Well, Jimmy Dore, the political comedian, put it in slightly sharper terms by just saying that Trump realized, and it was as a part of a critique of Bernie Sanders' campaign and the bad advice that he claims that Sanders gets, although he's being pretty hard on Sanders too, but he's mostly blaming Sanders for listening to the bad advice of his campaign advisors. But he basically is telling Bernie, look at what Trump did. He got the Republican nomination by attacking the Republican Party establishment. You should be doing that too. Jimmy Dore also says, and he's not my favorite political philosopher, but I think he's right about this. Trump did it as a part of his whole hucksterism routine. He did it to get elected. He didn't do it to actually do what he said he was going to do.
That's the important point.
But the point is, granted, that people voted for him because he said those things.
Exactly. That's right. And that has got to be realized.
Or people didn't vote for either of them because at least Hillary Clinton wasn't saying anything different from what Obama had said the previous two elections.
That's true. That's true. You're listening News from Neptune. We have the rest of the world to cover in the next 15 or 20 minutes. You want to deal a hand?
Yeah. Well, let me first of all, just a couple of things on my list, just in passing. I already mentioned Tulsi Gabbard, Thomas Edsall. A couple of articles I just want to mention in passing. Walden Bello, the Filipino economist, has written a couple of good articles on counterpunch in the last couple of weeks. One on
he was our guest here once long ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he's a smart guy.
Yep.
And very businesslike in his view of the world. Not businesslike, but he did have an article on China, which I think clarifies a lot about how the Chinese economy actually works, which I think people will find informative, and that I know Jeff Nicholson will put on the show notes. And also just this morning on the WTO, the not to be lamented, rightfully according to him, end of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, which goes back to 1995, and really I think provides a good overview of that. Another article on Counterpunch this morning was by a guy who I know mainly through listening to his interviews on the This Is Hell podcast. His name is Brian Mier, M-I-E-R, and he lives in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and he operates he works for a outlet called Brazil Wire, I think it's called, but he's talking about Mexico, and he says this in his most recent article on Counterpunch. He doesn't usually write for Counterpunch. He wrote, "Will the U.S. left work to normalize the impending coup attempt in Mexico the way it did for Venezuela, Bolivia, Brazil, and Nicaragua?" And then he goes on, "Last July, I gave a speech in the Left Forum in Brooklyn. When it was over, a young activist stood up and announced in perfect English that they were anarchists from Mexico. They were anarchists from Mexico who had traveled to the Left Forum to speak out against the human rights abuses being perpetrated by the quote-unquote neoliberal Mexican president López Obrador against protesters. Since the panel I participated in had nothing to do with Mexico, I imagine," Brian Mier imagined, an entire battalion of self-proclaimed Mexican vanguard leftists changing the subject in panel after panel at the Left Forum to damage AMLO's image by exaggerating the connection between the Mexican president and local police forces under the control of opposition governments, as had happened to Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff, the whole business that Beer knows most about, during the lead up to the World Cup. So it begins, Beer thought, as we in Brazil, as we say in Brazil, I've seen this movie before. And then one last little thing for Jeff to put on the show notes: the amazingly ridiculous and unbelievable column that Philip Weiss wrote about some comments by Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor of the Atlantic, regarding Israel and Palestine, which I won't go into, but if you believe that Jeffrey Goldberg has become any kind of a reasonable person regarding Israel and Palestine, he certainly hasn't.
I will shift gears a bit here,
sure,
if I might. If I can find my place, as I had a moment ago. The best political column I saw this week was a movie review. A movie by Terrence Malick called A Hidden Life celebrates the life of Franz Jägerstätter. Jägerstätter was an Austrian farmer whose principled opposition to Hitler led to his execution after the conjunction of Austria and Germany, but he remained a figure of moral and principled opposition to Nazism, and it was noted and recalled by a book by a man that I was happy to know slightly many years ago, and it's now become, his life has now become a movie called A Hidden Life, and it was it's reviewed here by Michael McCaffrey, who writes for Counterpunch and other publications. Although the movie A Hidden Life was in development before Trump became president, some out here in Hollywood have interpreted the film, remember it's about a resistor in the Second World War, interpreted the film as a metaphor for the moral imperative to resist Trump. I think that interpretation is myopic at best, and believe that the movie is unintentionally a scathing indictment of the moral vacuity and hypocrisy at the heart of the anti-Trump resistance. This is an important point. The main point I took away from the film is that moral authority is essential if opposition to evil is to endure. Franz Jägerstätter had an abundance of moral authority because his loyalty was not to country, village, leader, party, policy, or even church, but to the truth. The opposition to Trump, which calls itself the resistance, or the hashtag resistance, if you follow their convention, the opposition to Trump, that is the opposition from the political establishment in the U.S., good liberals and so forth, that has been trumpeting its existence as the hashtag resistance for a while, that group loathes the U.S. president because he's a boor and a bully. Their stance is based solely on his personality and political party rather than on the moral principle to which Jägerstätter adhered. I don't think that's quite right. That opposition takes that as the thing they're opposing. What they really oppose is Trump's threatened departure from the military and economic policies of the Bush-Obama administration. That's what it's about. But they can't say that openly, and therefore the notion is orange man bad, Trump is a boor and a bully, therefore we've got to get him out of the presidency as fast as possible. The stance is based solely on his personality and political party rather than the moral principle to which Jägerstätter adhered. This lack of commitment to truth and principle is what exposes the hashtag resistance as being completely vapid and devoid of moral standing. For instance, they're rightfully furious over Trump's immigration policies and like to wail about babies in cages to prove their point. But that outrage rings entirely hollow, since they never spoke up in opposition when Obama put babies in cages and deported so many immigrants that he became known as the deporter-in-chief. Equally disingenuous is their outrage over Trump's supposed war on the free press. Obama prosecuted more whistleblowers during his 2 terms than every other president combined. And yet none of these resistors said a word in opposition at the time. We'll talk about that in terms of the press suppressing activities of the First World, back to the Wilson administration. Obama was the president who used those suppressing activities from the First World War more than any president between Wilson and his own time. Even more damning is their deification of morally and ethically dubious intelligence agency apparatchiks. John Brennan, Michael Hayden, and James Clapper are all criminals and moral abominations for being integral parts of America's heinous torture, rendition, surveillance, and drone war programs, and yet they're hailed as patriots and heroes. The FBI has long infiltrated civil rights, anti-war, and environmental groups in order to destroy them. But that hasn't stopped the hashtag resistance from celebrating the Bureau's professionalism and genuflecting before loathsome establishment creatures like FBI alums Robert Mueller and James Comey out of pure anti-Trump animus. I think it's more than that, but anti-Trump animus is bound up with it. Political darlings of Trump haters, such as Democrats Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, and Eric Swalwell, call Trump a traitor, but then pass expansive military and intelligence bills that further empower the executive branch and the Washington war machine. The hashtag resistance has further proven their hypocrisy by embracing the establishment talking points to a shocking degree. These allegedly liberal anti-Trumpers are shameless anti-progressive shills for empire who cheer the prosecution and persecution of truth-tellers such as Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, and Chelsea Manning, and decry the failure of Trump to go to war in Syria and Iran and to be more belligerent towards Russia. Franz Jägerstätter lived a quiet, seemingly inconsequential hidden life, that's the title of the picture, until he was forced by his conscience to oppose the Nazis and carry the cross of truth from his Eden in the Austrian Alps to his Golgotha in Berlin. Pope Benedict XVI beatified Jägerstätter, made him a saint, or called him a saint, in 2007 for his unwavering commitment to Christian moral principles in the face of formidable evil. In contrast, the fraudulent hashtag resistance in America only play at opposing evil, as is proven by their craven sycophancy towards the depraved neoliberal imperial establishment and its military intelligence industrial complex. The establishment in America is a malignant, brutish, and bloodthirsty beast that has killed and exploited millions of innocent people from Asia to the Middle East to Latin America and everywhere in between over the last 70 years, and the self-righteous and self-aggrandizing anti-Trump hashtag resistance poseurs will never have the moral authority of a great man like Jägerstätter until they recognize that simple fact. For them to squabble over which mask to wear, be it the folksy mask of George W. Bush, or the good old boy mask of Bill Clinton, or the hope and change mask of Barack Obama, or the brash and brazen mask of Donald Trump, is a fool's errand and the devil's handiwork. A Hidden Life, Terrence Malick's film that we're talking about here, is a deeply moving and worthwhile cinematic venture because it shows the poignant struggles of a man who, unlike the current crop of resistors, was willing to sacrifice everything in his service to the truth. The hashtag resistance must learn the crucial lesson of Jägerstätter that loyalty to the truth must be the priority if it ever hopes to attain any moral authority. The first, most basic, and most important truth that they need to understand is this: Donald Trump is not the cause of the evil of neoliberalism and American empire. He's a consequence of it. I think that's good. And as I say, the best political column I've seen this week in a obscure movie review.
Yeah. we got 4 minutes or so, 5 minutes at the most.
All yours.
Okay. Well, I mean, one thing is, this may or may not relate directly what you have to say, but I've been listening also to a podcast called Philosophize This, which is a series of now about 135 half an hour or so podcasts by a very smart and funny guy named Stephen West, which goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks and even before then, and then brings us forward. And I listened to a couple in the last day or two about the the well-known, at some point, University of Chicago, political philosopher Leo Strauss. And I realized that Leo Strauss had been, in many ways, given an unfair treatment because of his alleged tutelage of Paul Wolfowitz and perhaps other neocon thinkers, and that Leo Strauss was you may not see it this way, I don't know, but Leo Strauss's work and his life is actually worth understanding in political philosophical terms, as would be someone like Hannah Arendt and people sort of that ilk. And that we don't do enough, besides the Marxist stuff, which I like the best, we don't do enough sort of regular, sort of non-Marxist political philosophizing in the tradition of the ancient Greeks, which was what Strauss's argument was about, the ancients versus the moderns, and what those differences now are. And I realize this is A, there's no time left, and B, this isn't what we do on this show. But I'm still starting.
Maybe we should.
But I'm starting to think that there's views there that I haven't. People like Leo Strauss and even Nietzsche and his sort of influence on politics and how we think about politics. These are things that should be taken seriously and understood, because they're not really about what is to be done. They're about how it is we think about government and how we think about politics, and how the manners in which we think about politics relates to other aspects of our lives, and not just our economic lives.
Tune in next week where we'll start there. I think it's an extremely important point. You've been watching News from Neptune for the 51st week of 2019, a present edition. News from Neptune is presented by Carl Estabrook, David Green, and J.B. Nicholson. It's produced and directed by Jason Liggett and Kevin Lau. See the research notes on the Facebook page for News from Neptune from J.B. Nicholson. Inshallah, we'll be back next week with a new edition of News from Neptune to remind you, in the words of Edward de Vere in The Tempest, what's past is prologue, what to come in yours and my discharge. In the meantime, confusion to our enemies, and a good night to you.